Good to hear. Do you feel any pressure to keep up with some of the younger artists of today, like such as the Beyoncés and co?
Toni Braxton's feud with Beyoncé and Jay-Z ended her comeback before it even began. In 2002, Toni Braxton had her comeback lined up. New album, major rollout, a bold single that sampled Tupac's Me and My Girlfriend. Then, just like that, everything disappeared. Because right before her release, Beyoncé and Jay-Z dropped '03 Bonnie and Clyde with the exact same sample. Her version got shelved, her label went quiet, the album tanked, and what should have been a rebirth became a slow erasure. But here's the real question. Was this just bad timing, or did she mess with the wrong couple? Because what happened next wasn't just about a song. It was about silence, about doors closing, about a warning that still echoes across the industry today. You don't go up against Beyoncé and Jay-Z unless you're ready to lose everything. So what really happened? By the early 2000s, Toni Braxton had already lived through one industry nightmare. Despite selling over 20 million albums in the 90s, her first bankruptcy in 1998 had left her humiliated and financially drained. But instead of disappearing, she planned a comeback, a big one. Her 2002 album More Than a Woman was supposed to mark her return to the spotlight. And the lead single? A bold modern track titled Me and My Boyfriend, built around the haunting loop of Tupac's Me and My Girlfriend. Toni was banking on it. She had the vision, the timing, the sound, but then something happened that would derail everything. Just weeks before her single was set to launch, Jay-Z and Beyoncé, still riding the wave of her Destiny's Child fame and his Rockefeller empire, released '03 Bonnie and Clyde. Same Tupac sample, same couple duet concept, but their version came out first, and it changed the entire narrative. Fans didn't care that Toni had the idea first. The radio didn't wait for her version, and the industry didn't slow down to hear her side of the story. Jay and Beyoncé had already claimed the sound and turned it into a cultural moment. Worse, Beyoncé was the new it girl. She was transitioning from group star to solo icon, and this song, her first major collaboration with Jay-Z, was being spun not just as music, but as a love story, a branding move, a power play. Toni never stood a chance. She didn't stay silent about it either. In interviews, she admitted she felt betrayed, that someone must have leaked her sample plan, that the timing couldn't have been accidental.
So I'm really disappointed. I'm like, I've been in the business 10 years now. I got these new up-and-coming divas trying to steal my mojo, and I'm like, what's up with that? I'm not going to handle it. I'm going to take this. We're going to fight this.
But calling that out, especially in a business where everyone else was staying silent, would come at a cost. Because Toni wasn't just challenging another artist. She was going up against two of the most protected brands in the industry.
I will not do that.
Yeah, but
I won't do that. She's a talented girl. The chick can sing. Jay-Z, he's a great rapper, but this ain't cool. You can't come and steal from me. You can't come steal from me and my family.
Jay-Z was already building a media empire. Beyoncé was being positioned as the future of global pop culture. And Rockefeller had serious pull. So when Toni's version finally dropped, it landed with a thud. No buzz, no radio love, no momentum. It sounded like a second-place effort, even though she had the idea first. The media framed it as a coincidence. The industry shrugged it off. But for Toni, it wasn't just about losing a song. It was about losing control of her comeback. And that one moment would set off a chain of events that would unravel her entire career. Again, after the sample fiasco, Toni Braxton was still trying to move forward. More Than a Woman had more than one track after all. But something changed. Not on the charts, in the shadows, quietly, strategically. Suddenly, there was no promo, no interviews, no major performances. Her label, Arista, stopped pushing the album altogether. One moment, she was headlining comeback plans, and the next, she was invisible.
What happens is they'll give you an advancement on the next record, and then the next record, so you kind of staying dead in a sense.
This wasn't an official cancellation, it was something worse. The industry freeze, a silent kind of punishment. No one says it out loud, but the result is the same. You're done. Why? Because Toni had made the mistake of going public. She had admitted she was pissed. She questioned the integrity of the rollout, and most importantly, she did it in a business where silence is rewarded and speaking up is punished. And when Beyoncé's name is involved, the stakes double. By 2002, Beyoncé wasn't just another pop star on the rise. She was being actively protected, managed, positioned. Every move she made was part of a larger plan. And that plan didn't leave room for criticism. Jay-Z was already one of the most powerful men in music. Beyoncé was becoming a brand the industry needed to survive. And Toni, she was now viewed as a threat to that narrative. So when Toni's frustration hit the press, the music machine did what it always does to inconvenient voices. It turned the volume down. More Than a Woman was essentially buried alive. No major radio traction, no serious marketing push. The lead single, once positioned to relaunch her, was seen as a cheap knockoff, even though she'd had the idea first. And because there was no public scandal, no beef, no headlines to trace, the public didn't even realize it was happening. One of the most iconic R&B voices of the 90s had just been sidelined, with no explanation. But inside the industry, people understood. You don't feud with Beyoncé, not if you want to work again. And you definitely don't go against both Beyoncé and Jay-Z, not unless you've got a bigger army behind you. Toni didn't. She had talent, she had legacy, but she didn't have power. And in an industry run by gatekeepers and silence, talent without power isn't protection, it's a liability. That quiet blackballing, that freeze-out, was only the beginning. Because when the industry turns its back on you, so does your future. By 2010, Toni Braxton filed for bankruptcy again. But this time, it wasn't just about bad contracts or medical bills. It was about being shut out. Let's rewind. After More Than a Woman flopped in 2002, Toni's team hoped the failure was temporary. Maybe she could regroup, rebrand, get a second wind. But the problem wasn't just the music, it was the invisible wall she had just run into. With no hit single, she lost radio presence. That meant no tours, no high-paying performances, no endorsement deals. All of the major sources of income that used to keep her afloat were gone, and nobody was offering to help. She was less bankable now. Labels didn't want to invest. Collaborators weren't calling. She'd crossed an unspoken line, and in return, the doors were quietly closing. And then came the health issues. Toni was diagnosed with lupus and a heart condition, serious enough to cancel a multi-million-dollar Las Vegas residency that could have saved her financially.
The Vegas show, I just renewed all my contracts with all my vendors. And then a month later, I got sick.
She had to pay the money back. The collapse snowballed. She owed millions to the IRS, creditors, clothing vendors, even hospitals. And the moment she needed a safety net the most, nobody extended a hand. That's the part people miss. It wasn't that Beyoncé or Jay-Z personally sent lawyers after Toni. They didn't have to. The system worked for them. Labels, radio programmers, award shows, brand executives, they all orbit the same power center. And in a world where Jay and Bey are the epicenter, going against them makes you radioactive. But being inconvenient can cost you everything. It means no second chances, no rescue deals, no surprise features on someone else's chart-topping album to get your name back in the headlines. Toni's brand was seen as outdated, risky, irrelevant, and that perception killed her finances faster than any lawsuit ever could. She filed for bankruptcy a second time in 2010, this time with fewer resources, less buzz, and no help from the industry that once celebrated her voice. And that second fall wasn't just devastating, it was personal. Because when Toni looked around for allies, collaborators, producers, even media support, the silence was deafening. She'd challenged the wrong power couple, and in this industry, that's enough to make sure you fall and never rise again. Toni Braxton wasn't the first to face the consequences, and she definitely wasn't the last. In the early 2000s, Beyoncé was transforming into a global brand. Her trajectory was being carefully sculpted, not just by music, but by media, marketing, and management. And anyone who disrupted that image even slightly suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of the industry machine. Carrie Hilson learned this the hard way. She dropped "Turning Me On," which many took as a subtle jab at Beyoncé. In the song, she called out a fake singer who needs to sit down and have some babies. The line didn't name names, but the industry read between the lines.
She need to go have some babies, she need to sit down, she fading. The mother chicks ain't even worth my time to talk about.
Almost overnight, Carrie's momentum stalled. Tours dried up, collaborations stopped, her label's support vanished. She later admitted she'd been unofficially banned from working with key artists, all because of a lyric. Then came Keyshia Cole. In 2013, Beyoncé released "Bow Down, I've Been On," a bold, aggressive record that declared her dominance.
Get it twisted, this my shit. Bow down, bitch.
But Keyshia wasn't impressed. She took to X to call the lyrics hypocritical, pointing out how Beyoncé once encouraged female unity and now wanted women to bow down. The response was swift and brutal. The Bayhive, Beyoncé's notoriously loyal fan base, swarmed her accounts. But beyond the online chaos, Keisha experienced something more damaging: disconnection. Producers like The Dream refused to work with her. Industry events stopped inviting her. Her career took a nosedive.
And there was something about how Keisha Cole complained that you weren't giving her any songs because of your relationship with Beyonce and how she sort of said something about.
Sound familiar? Toni Braxton had her own version of that silence. She didn't attack Beyoncé personally. She merely expressed frustration that her idea had been stolen. But in an industry where loyalty is currency, even quiet criticism can ruin you. Each of these women had something in common. They were talented, they were visible, and they crossed the wrong line. They challenged Beyoncé's positioning, directly or indirectly, and found themselves iced out, not by a headline scandal, not by a diss track, by silence, by omission, by industry indifference. Toni's career collapse after the sample war fits the same mold. The music didn't matter. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was who had the power. And in the 2000s, and even more so now, Beyoncé and Jay-Z don't just make the rules. They are the rules. To understand how someone like Toni Braxton, a Grammy-winning, multi-platinum selling artist, could be so easily silenced and sidelined, you have to look beyond the sample feud. This wasn't just about a song, it was about power, structural power. Because by the time that sample war played out in 2002, Jay-Z and Beyoncé were already becoming more than musicians. They were turning into institutions. They weren't just making records, they were building empires.
I hear you be the block, but I'm the life to keep the streets.
Jay-Z's Rock Nation was more than a label. It was an all-in-one machine. Artist management, label operations, sports agency, philanthropy, all wrapped into one. His influence extended far past hip-hop. And Beyoncé? She didn't just release music, she released statements. Through Parkwood Entertainment, she controlled her visual albums, her performances, her brand deals, her Netflix documentaries, and even her merchandise. Every frame, every lyric, every product that came out of her universe was intentional. And the thing is, they didn't just make culture. They controlled the channels that distributed it. Festival organizers, radio programmers, streaming platforms, magazine editors, they all orbit the Carter Kingdom. And if you want access to the biggest stars in the world, you don't make enemies with the gatekeepers. You play the game. You don't risk your relationship with Beyoncé's team just to support an artist who fell out of favor. That's what made Toni's situation so deadly. Not because she wasn't talented, but because the industry chose not to support her anymore. She didn't just lose a hit single. She lost access to the very systems that used to support her. With one misstep, one public frustration about a stolen idea, she became inconvenient. And in the entertainment business, being inconvenient is a silent career death sentence. An anonymous A&R executive once said, "It's not just talent anymore, it's who you know and who protects you." And that couldn't be more true when it comes to Jay-Z and Beyoncé. Diddy might have pioneered the artist as mogul blueprint back in the 90s, but today his power lies more in legacy media and branding. Jay and Bey, their influence is current, active, dangerous. They decide whose albums get prioritized, whose names get placed on festival lineups, and which artists make it to the cover of Rolling Stone. The proof is in the pattern. Rihanna's career took off after Rock Nation took the reins. Megan Thee Stallion soared to Grammys and multi-million-dollar brand deals once she came under Beyoncé's wing. Even J. Cole and DJ Khaled saw their visibility expand through ties to the Carters. Now look at the other side. Carrie Hilson dissed Beyoncé, gone. Keisha Cole criticized her Super Bowl performance, lost industry support. Toni Braxton questioned a sample, spoke her truth, and disappeared from the mainstream. Not because she lacked talent, but because in an industry built on favor and access, talent without protection becomes a liability. Beyoncé and Jay-Z don't just succeed, they control success. And Toni Braxton was one of the earliest and quietest examples of what happens when you go up against that kind of power. Toni Braxton's voice once defined an era. In the 90s, you couldn't turn on a radio without hearing "Unbreak My Heart" or "Breathe Again." Her sound was haunting, elegant, and unmistakable. She wasn't just a singer, she was a moment in time. But by the time 2010 rolled around, that voice had been muted. Not because it faded, but because the industry decided it no longer fit the narrative they were selling. And part of that erasure traces directly back to the fallout with Beyoncé and Jay-Z. In a healthier industry climate, Toni might have recovered. Artists fall, comebacks happen, public opinion shifts, but Toni never got that second wind. She never got the carefully orchestrated redemption arc that other stars, even controversial ones, were allowed. No high-profile comeback album, no cosign from a new-gen superstar, no big Grammy comeback stage. Why? Because she was unsellable. Not because of scandal, but because of silence. The industry didn't blacklist her with press releases or public statements. They just stopped calling, stopped booking, stopped caring. And once that happens, once the machine stops moving for you, it's almost impossible to start it up again. Toni's second bankruptcy wasn't just about numbers, it was about abandonment. After the sample feud, she was left to fend for herself. The Vegas residency that could have saved her collapsed due to health issues. She owed millions to creditors, the IRS, hospitals, designers, and nobody, not one executive, not one label, not even a fellow artist, stepped in to pull her out. There were no lifelines from Jay-Z, no olive branches from Beyoncé, nothing. And it's not like they couldn't have. Both of them were in positions of power. A single gesture, a feature, a cosign, a performance invite could have changed Toni's story, but that call never came. Instead, Toni had to rebuild slowly, outside of the mainstream, with reality TV, with modest releases, with small tours. And even then, her past continued to haunt her. The same industry that once celebrated her now treated her as a relic, forgotten, archived. It's a harsh truth. In today's industry, power protects itself. And Toni Braxton's story became a cautionary tale for anyone thinking of speaking out, especially against Beyoncé. Because the system doesn't just erase your music, it rewrites your legacy. And when it's done, it makes sure nobody remembers you were right. By the time the dust settled, Toni Braxton was still standing, but barely. 2 bankruptcies, a scrapped comeback, lost endorsements, a career that should have been legendary reduced to whispers. And through it all, Beyoncé and Jay-Z kept climbing. Some fans still believe what happened to Toni was just bad luck, bad timing, maybe even bad management. But when you step back, when you look at the pattern, the timing, and the silence, the picture becomes harder to ignore. Toni's fall didn't happen in a vacuum. It followed a very specific moment. She challenged a rising superstar. She expressed frustration. She spoke out about something the industry didn't want to talk about. And from that point forward, her career never looked the same. Was it coincidence that her album got buried after she criticized the sample leak? Was it just bad fortune that her label pulled back support while Beyoncé's version of the same song skyrocketed? Was it unrelated that the industry closed its doors when she needed help the most? Or was it the system doing what it always does, protecting its chosen stars and punishing those who disrupt the narrative? Because by the early 2000s, Beyoncé and Jay-Z weren't just building careers, they were consolidating control. Rock Nation, Parkwood, brand deals, streaming partnerships, touring empires, every lane that artists used to depend on, they now had influence over. Toni wasn't just up against 2 artists, she was up against a machine. And that machine didn't need to issue threats or make public statements. It just needed to stop offering support. It just needed to stay silent. And when the silence comes from the top, everybody else follows. So what happened to Toni Braxton isn't just about a sample war. It's about how fragile a career becomes when it's not protected by power. It's about how easily the world can forget you, even when your voice once defined a generation. And it's about how, in the entertainment business, speaking out against the wrong people doesn't just cost you a hit song, it costs you everything. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.